In the 1960s, the Grand Ole Opry wasn't just a stage, it was the high church of country music, a world with rigid, unwritten rules, especially for women. The girl singers, as they were called, were expected to be pictures of Southern femininity, modest in floor-length gowns, sweet in demeanor, and respectfully in the shadow of the male stars. You sang your song, you curtsied, and you didn't make waves. And then Jeannie Seely walked in. She came not from the hills of Tennessee, but from the blue-collar towns of Pennsylvania. She was a former bank clerk and record label secretary who carried herself with a modern urban confidence that was utterly foreign to the Nashville establishment. The first shockwave came when she walked onto the hallowed Opry stage in a miniskirt, an act of sartorial heresy that reportedly made the legendary Ernest Tubb grumble, "They don't wear them dresses on the Opry." But the dress was just the opening act. When she stepped to the microphone, she sang her Grammy-winning hit, "Don't Touch Me," a song of such raw adult honesty about the end of desire that it silenced the critics. And when the song was over, she didn't just exit gracefully, she bantered. She told jokes, she was witty, sassy, and completely in command. She wasn't just a pretty voice, she was a personality, a force of nature who refused to be confined to the role of a demure girl singer. This is the story of the woman they called Miss Country Soul. It's the story of a trailblazer who, with a powerhouse voice and an unbreakable spirit, gently but firmly dragged the Grand Ole Opry into the modern era. She didn't just break the rules, she rewrote them, proving that a woman could be the star, the host, and the smartest person on the stage, paving the way for every independent woman in country music who followed. To understand the quiet revolution Jeannie Seely started, you have to understand that she was a product of two entirely different worlds. The first was the world that created her dream. She wasn't a daughter of the South. She didn't grow up in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains or on the dusty plains of Texas. Jean-Francis Seely was born in 1940 in Titusville, Pennsylvania, a small industrious town in the heart of America's original oil country. This was a landscape of rolling hills and hardwood forests, a place whose rhythms were dictated not by the cotton harvest, but by the shifts at the local factories and refineries. It was a world that valued hard work, community, and a certain stoic northern pragmatism. Her childhood was modest, but it was rich with music. Her father was a talented musician, and the family home was a place of joyful noise. Her parents adored country music, and it was the soundtrack of her youth. And like countless other families across the continent, they participated in the sacred Saturday night ritual, gathering around the family radio, patiently turning the dial, trying to pull the faint ethereal signal of WSM in Nashville through the static. For a young girl in rural Pennsylvania, listening to the Grand Ole Opry was like looking through a telescope into another universe. The voices of Roy Acuff, Kitty Wells, and little Jimmy Dickens were transmissions from a magical, mythical place called Nashville. It was a world of raw emotion, of stories about love and loss so honest they felt more real than her own life. It was in these moments, sitting in the dark, that the dream was planted. She didn't just want to listen to the Opry, she wanted to be on the Opry. She pursued that dream with a quiet determination. By the time she was a teenager, she was a regular performer on WNAE in nearby Warren, Pennsylvania, singing on the radio that had been her first teacher. She took a respectable job at a local bank, married her high school sweetheart, and settled into a life that was, by all measures, stable and secure. But the dream, born in the static of that old radio, was a powerful one. The voice inside her was too big for a small town, and she knew it. The other world, the one she dreamed of, was a place she had never seen, but whose rules were as real as the Tennessee soil. The Nashville Jeannie Seely dreamed of in the early 1960s was in the midst of a profound identity crisis. The raw, hillbilly sound of its past was being threatened by the slick, rebellious energy of rock and roll. In response, the city's power brokers, a small circle of brilliant producers and executives like Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley, engineered a new sound, the Nashville sound. It was a strategic commercial decision. They smoothed out the rough edges, replacing the mournful fiddles and wailing steel guitars with lush string sections, sophisticated piano arrangements, and polished backing vocalists from groups like the Jordanaires. It was country music in a tuxedo, designed to cross over to the pop charts and compete with Elvis and the Beatles. This new sound was created within a culture that was deeply conservative and overwhelmingly male-dominated. The music industry on Music Row was a fraternity. Women had a place, to be sure, but it was a carefully prescribed one. They were the canaries, the girl singers, the vocalists. They were not, with very few exceptions, the producers, the executives, the publishers, or even the instrumentalists in the studio. Groundbreaking artists like Kitty Wells had proven a woman could sell records, and Patsy Cline was proving a woman could deliver a song with a power and sophistication that transcended genre. Loretta Lynn was beginning to write songs with a startlingly honest female point of view. But these were pioneers fighting an uphill battle against a deeply entrenched patriarchal system. The expectation for most women was to sing the songs they were given, look pretty on stage, and not cause any trouble. While Nashville was busy polishing its sound and reinforcing its traditions, the rest of the Western world was exploding in a riot of color and change. The 1960s were a decade of seismic social shifts. The civil rights movement was demanding justice. The sexual revolution was challenging centuries of moral convention. And a powerful second wave of feminism was arguing that a woman's place was wherever she chose it to be. Fashion became a powerful symbol of this new female liberation. In London, designer Mary Quant had unleashed the miniskirt upon the world, and it became an instant uniform for a new generation of women who refused to be constrained by the girdles and floor-length hemlines of their mothers. It was a declaration of independence, a statement of bodily autonomy and youthful rebellion. Nashville, however, remained a cultural island, a city trying desperately to hold back the tide of social change. It was a place that valued politeness over protest, tradition over revolution. It was into this insulated, traditional, male-dominated world that Jeannie Seely was preparing to journey. She was not just a singer from Pennsylvania. She was an unwitting ambassador from this other modern world. She wasn't arriving with a political agenda. She was simply a woman who believed in being herself. And in the Nashville of the 1960s, that was the most revolutionary act of all. But a revolution rarely follows a straight path. Before Jeannie Seely could bring her modern sensibilities to the heart of country music, her journey would take a surprising and deeply formative detour. It was a move west, not south, that would temper her talent, broaden her perspective, and infuse her country heart with a dose of California soul, making her the unique force she was destined to become. The distance between a dream and its realization is rarely a straight line. For Jeannie Seely, the path from the cozy living room in Titusville to the revered stage of the Rymani Auditorium would not run directly south. It would first take a long, crucial, and character-defining detour to the west. After graduating from high school, she did what was expected. She took a respectable job as a secretary at a local bank. She married her high school sweetheart. On the surface, her life was settling into a comfortable, conventional pattern, the kind that so many in her generation sought. But beneath the surface, the dream persisted. It was a constant low hum of ambition, a whisper that told her this was not her final destination. Her nights and weekends were filled with music, performing with local bands, honing her voice, and beginning to write her own songs, tentative first steps in finding her own artistic identity. She knew that to truly chase the dream, she had to leave. But in the early 1960s, for a young country singer, the choice of where to go was not as obvious as it might seem. Nashville was the capital, yes, but Los Angeles was the burgeoning, glittering heart of the entire American music industry. And so, in an act of youthful courage and considerable risk, Jeannie and her husband decided to leave the familiar comfort of Pennsylvania behind. They packed up their lives and drove west toward the golden promise of California. The culture shock must have been immense. This was not the slow-paced, close-knit world of Titusville. This was Los Angeles, a sprawling, fast-moving metropolis, a city of dreamers and hustlers, a place where fortunes were made and hearts were broken every single day. Jeannie did not arrive as a star. She arrived as another anonymous face in the crowd, and she did what she had to do to survive. She put her musical ambitions on the back burner and fell back on her practical skills. She took a job as a secretary at Liberty Records, one of the premier pop and rock labels of the era. It was a decision born of necessity, but it would prove to be the most important education of her career. For 3 years, Jeannie Seely was not a performer. She was an observer, a quiet witness to the inner workings of the music business from a perspective few aspiring artists ever get to see. She sat at a desk, typing lyrics for pop songs, answering phones for record executives, and watching the entire machinery of stardom operate from the inside out. She saw the power of a great song, the mechanics of promotion, the intricate dance between artist, producer, and label. She was learning the business, not from a textbook, but from the front lines, in an environment far removed from the cozy, insular world of Nashville's Music Row. Her life was a duality. By day, she was Jean, the efficient secretary, but by night, she was Jeannie, the songwriter. She poured all of her experiences, the loneliness of a big city, the ache of her homesickness, the observations of the lives and loves around her, into her songs. Her craft was maturing, her voice as a writer becoming clearer. It was during this period, in the quiet solitude of her apartment, after a long day at the office, that she wrote a song of profound, world-weary beauty. The song was titled, "Anyone Who Knows What Love Is Will Understand." It wasn't a simple country ballad. It was something else entirely. It was a soulful, melancholic, almost gospel-infused meditation on the pain and perseverance of love. It was a song that could only have been written by someone who had seen a bit of life, someone who understood that love wasn't just romance, but also endurance and forgiveness. Through her connections at work, the song found its way to the legendary New Orleans R&B singer, Irma Thomas. Irma's recording of the song was a masterpiece of soul music, her voice perfectly capturing the song's deep, resonant emotion. While it wasn't a massive chart topper at the time, the song endured, becoming a cult classic, a piece of timeless American music. Decades later, it would be rediscovered by a new generation, its haunting melody and poignant lyrics featured in films and critically acclaimed television shows, a testament to the young secretary from Pennsylvania who had a gift for capturing the complexity of the human heart. Her time in California was broadening her musical palette, infusing her country roots with a deep, undeniable soul. Her job also put her in the orbit of the many Nashville songwriters who made regular trips to the West Coast to pitch their songs to pop artists. One of these men was a walking, talking embodiment of Music City cool. His name was Hank Cochran, Hank Cochran wasn't just a songwriter, he was a force of nature. A charismatic, brilliant, and deeply respected figure, he had already penned some of the most iconic songs in country music history, including Patsy Cline's immortal I Fall to Pieces and Eddie Arnold's Make the World Go Away. He had an almost supernatural instinct for a great song and an even better singer. Somehow, in the sprawling metropolis of Los Angeles, Jeannie Seely's path crossed with Hank Cochran's. He heard her. Maybe it was a simple, homemade demo tape she passed along, or perhaps he heard her singing casually at an industry party. However it happened, the effect was immediate and profound. He didn't just hear a good voice, he heard a unique voice. He heard the country honesty, yes, but he also heard the soulful ache she had cultivated in California. He heard the intelligence in her phrasing, the adult emotion in her delivery. He heard a star. Cochran became her most ardent champion, her staunchest believer. He looked at this talented woman working as a secretary and saw a future member of the Grand Ole Opry. He began a campaign of friendly but persistent persuasion. "Jeannie," he would tell her, "what are you doing out here? You're a country singer. Your voice, your songs, they belong in Nashville." To Jeannie, this was both a validation of her deepest hopes and a terrifying proposition. Nashville was the dream, but it was also the great unknown. In California, she had a life. It wasn't the life she ultimately wanted, but it was stable. She had a job, a home. The move to Nashville would mean giving all of that up. It would mean walking away from her marriage, which had grown strained under the pressures of their life in California. It would mean betting her entire future on the word of this charismatic songwriter and on a dream she had nurtured since childhood. It was a gamble of the highest order. In 1965, she made her choice. At the age of 25, Jeannie Seely packed her life into a beat-up car and left California in her rearview mirror. The 2,000-mile drive to Nashville was a journey across more than just geography. It was a journey across a threshold from one life to the next. As the miles of asphalt unspooled before her, the landscape of America shifted. The palm trees of Hollywood gave way to the mesas of Arizona, the cattle ranches of Texas, and finally, the dense rolling green hills of Tennessee. With every mile, she was driving further away from the safety of her old life and deeper into the heart of her own ambition. The fear must have been a constant companion, but it was overshadowed by a powerful, burning hope. She did not arrive in Nashville to a welcoming parade. She arrived as a virtual unknown, a single woman in a town that ran on connections and old-fashioned family values. She had very little money, no record deal, no job, and no home. All she had was a handful of brilliant songs, a one-of-a-kind voice, and the belief of one very important man. Her first impression of the city was likely a confusing mix of awe and intimidation. This was it, the land of her heroes, the place she had imagined for so long, but it was also a small, insular town where everyone seemed to know everyone else, and she was an outsider. The great gamble had been made. Now she had to find a way to make it pay off. Her one ace in the hole was Hank Cochran. True to his word, he became her guide and protector in this new world. He knew her voice needed the right producer, someone who would understand her unique blend of country and soul. He took her to meet Fred Foster, the visionary head of Monument Records. Foster was not a typical Nashville producer. He was known for his dramatic, almost cinematic productions, most famously with the legendary Roy Orbison. Foster heard in Jeannie what Cochran had heard, a voice that was both powerful and vulnerable, classic and modern. He signed her immediately. The deck was now set. The label was right, the producer was right. All they needed was the right song. And Hank Cochran, the master songwriter, had been saving one. It was a song he had written that was unlike anything else on country radio. It was raw, painfully honest, and emotionally complex. It was a woman's desperate plea for a love that was more than skin deep. It was a song that required a singer who was not afraid to be vulnerable, to lay her heart bare for the world to hear. The song was called Don't Touch Me. The recording session for Don't Touch Me has become a part of Nashville lore. Surrounded by the greatest session musicians in the world, Jeannie Seely, the newcomer from Pennsylvania by way of Hollywood, stepped up to the microphone. Fred Foster's production was lush and powerful, the strings swelling like a heartbreak, the piano providing a gentle, mournful foundation. And then Jeannie sang. She didn't just sing the words, she inhabited them. Her voice, filled with that signature soulful ache, conveyed a universe of longing and pain. It was a performance of stunning emotional clarity. When she finished, the hardened professionals in the studio knew they had just captured lightning in a bottle. Released in 1966, the song was a slow-building sensation. It was so different, so adult, that it took radio a moment to catch on. But the public response was undeniable. Listeners, especially women, connected deeply with the song's raw honesty. It climbed to number 2 on the Billboard country chart and crossed over to the pop charts, becoming a national hit. In early 1967, the ultimate validation arrived. Jeannie Seely won the Grammy Award for Best Female Country Vocal Performance. The gamble had paid off in the most spectacular way imaginable. The secretary who had once typed lyrics for other artists was now a Grammy-winning star. The girl who had listened to the Opry on a crackling radio in Pennsylvania had conquered Nashville on her own terms with a sound all her own. She had arrived, and now she was about to walk through the doors of the one place she had always dreamed of, and nothing would ever be the same again. That Grammy win was the golden key. It was the undeniable proof that Jeannie Seely's unique blend of country heart and soulful honesty was not just a niche, but a powerful new voice in American music. And with that key, she could now unlock the one door she had been dreaming of her entire life. Her victory was not just personal, it was a signal to the Nashville establishment, and the Grand Ole Opry could no longer ignore it. Winning a Grammy Award does more than just give an artist a trophy for their mantle. It serves as an undeniable validation, an official stamp of approval from the entire music industry. For Jeannie Seely, it was a thunderous affirmation that her unique sound, her adult perspective, and her soulful delivery were not just viable, but vital. In the wake of her win, the whispers of the Nashville traditionalists who found her style too modern or her song too risque were drowned out by the roar of popular and critical acclaim. She was no longer just a promising newcomer, she was a certified star. And with that status came the invitation she had been dreaming of since she was a little girl listening to the radio in the dark. The Grand Ole Opry was calling her home. The night of her induction was the culmination of a lifelong dream. To stand in that 6-foot circle of worn pine, a piece of flooring cut from the very stage where her heroes had stood, was the most sacred moment in a country artist's career. It was a coronation. As she was formally welcomed into the Opry family, the little girl from Titusville who had chased a faint radio signal across the country had finally arrived at its source. The emotional weight of the moment was immense. This was the ultimate acceptance, the final proof that her improbable journey, her great gamble, had been worth it. But the official welcoming ceremony on stage was one thing. The backstage reality was another. Having a hit record and a Grammy forced the Opry to open its doors to her, but it didn't mean the old guard had to like it. From the moment she became a member, Jeannie Seely began a quiet, steady, and profoundly impactful campaign, not of rebellion, but of authenticity. She was not going to change to fit the Opry. She was going to be herself, and in doing so, she would inevitably change the Opry forever. The first and most visible front in this quiet revolution was, of course, her wardrobe. The famous miniskirt was not a one-time stunt. It was simply her style. In a world of gingham and gowns, she brought a modern, sophisticated, urban sensibility to her stage wear. She wore pantsuits, stylish cocktail dresses, and outfits that reflected the fashion of the day. She was signaling that a country music star didn't have to look like she had just stepped off a farm. Her appearance was a constant visual reminder that the world outside the Ryman's walls was changing, and she was a part of that world. While it seems trivial now, at the time it was a radical act. It was a declaration that a woman's professionalism and talent were not measured by the length of her hemline, but her revolution went far deeper than fashion. Soon after her induction, she achieved a milestone that was, in many ways, even more significant than the miniskirt. She became the first female member of the Grand Ole Opry to regularly host her own segment of the show. To understand the gravity of this, one has to understand what the role of host entailed. The host was the master of ceremonies, the pilot of that portion of the live broadcast. They set the tone, they controlled the pacing, they told the jokes, and they held the position of ultimate authority on that stage. For decades, it was a role exclusively reserved for the men, the established patriarchal figures of the Opry. For a woman, and a brand new member at that, to be handed this responsibility was unprecedented. And Jeannie thrived in the role. She was a natural. Her wit, which had been her shield and sword in her personal life, now became her greatest professional asset. She was a brilliant ad-libber, able to trade jokes with the famously quick-witted old-timers like Little Jimmy Dickens and Minnie Pearl. She could tell a captivating story, make a nervous young performer feel at ease, and connect with the audience with a warmth that felt utterly authentic. She wasn't just reading from a script, she was holding court. Her intelligence and sharp sense of humor allowed her to command the stage in a way no woman had before. She disarmed the old-fashioned sexism not with anger, but with a smile and a punchline that was always smarter than the insult. She was proving week after week that a woman could be more than just a pretty voice. She could be the brains of the operation, the charismatic center of gravity around which the other stars orbited. She was subtly but surely redefining the role of women at the Grand Ole Opry. While she was making waves at the Opry, her recording career was entering its next hugely successful phase. She found a perfect musical partner in fellow Opry star and reigning male vocalist of the year, Jack Green. Green, known as the Jolly Green Giant for his height and smooth baritone, was a more traditional country artist, but his voice blended perfectly with Jeannie's soulful delivery. Their partnership became one of the most successful in country music during the late 1960s and early 70s. They released a string of hit duets, including the chart topper, Wish I Didn't Have to Miss You. Their onstage chemistry was electric, a playful, warm rapport that audiences adored. They hit the road together, becoming one of the biggest and most in-demand touring acts in the nation. They played to sold-out crowds at state fairs, major auditoriums, and concert halls from coast to coast. This was the peak of her commercial success, a time of grueling tour schedules, screaming fans, and life on the road. Their partnership was also notable for what it wasn't. In an era when many male-female duos were romantically linked or sold themselves as such, Jeannie and Jack were simply the best of friends. Their relationship was built on a deep mutual respect for each other's talents. This further solidified Jeannie's image as a serious professional artist. She was co-headlining, sharing the spotlight, and proving that a woman could lead a major touring act with as much success as any man. Her intelligence and charisma were too bright to be contained, by the country music world alone. As her fame grew, she became a sought-after personality in the wider world of American media. She was a frequent and popular guest on national television talk shows. She sat on the coveted couch next to Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show, held her own with Merv Griffin, and charmed audiences on The Mike Douglas Show. She was a brilliant ambassador for country music. At a time when many Americans still viewed country stars as unsophisticated hillbillies, Jeannie Seely shattered that stereotype. She was articulate, funny, and worldly. She could speak intelligently about the craft of songwriting, the business of music, and the traditions of the Opry, all while looking like a sophisticated modern woman. She was proving to a national audience that country was not a synonym for backward. This media savvy also translated into business acumen. She became a popular commercial spokesperson, her face and voice appearing in ads across the country. She was building a multifaceted career, a brand. She was not just waiting for the next hit song to come along. She was actively creating a sustainable career based on her unique combination of talent and personality. She was the country girl who was completely at home in the big city, the Opry traditionalist who was a natural in a Hollywood television studio. By the mid-1970s, Jeannie Seely had achieved a level of success that must have seemed impossible to the young girl in Pennsylvania. She was a Grammy winner, a beloved and influential member of the Grand Ole Opry, a successful recording and touring artist, and a nationally recognized television personality. She had navigated the treacherous, male-dominated waters of Music City and had not only survived, but had triumphed, all without compromising an inch of who she was. She had quietly, wittily, and stylishly won the revolution. From the outside, her life looked perfect, but the same resilience that had powered her professional rise would soon be called upon to face a series of personal tragedies that would test her to the very core of her being. But a public life, no matter how successful, is always just one chapter of a larger story. Behind the bright lights of the Opry and the television studios, behind the confident smile of Miss Country Soul, was a private world as rich, complex, and often turbulent as any of the country songs she sang. To truly understand the depth of her character, one must look beyond the stage and into the heart of the partnerships that shaped her and the tragedies that would ultimately define her as a survivor. To the world, Jeannie Seely was Miss Country Soul, a confident, witty, trailblazing star. But behind the curtain, her life was as rich, complex, and often turbulent as any of the country songs she sang. At the center of her universe during this meteoric rise was the man who had discovered her, championed her, and ultimately married her, the legendary Hank Cochran. Their relationship was a collision of two brilliant, creative, and fiercely independent spirits. Their home in a Nashville suburb became a nerve center for Music City's creative community. It was a place of legendary late-night picking parties, where the biggest stars and most talented songwriters of the era would gather to trade songs, tell stories, and create music into the small hours of the morning. For a time, they were the ultimate Nashville power couple, the master songwriter and the soulful star, a partnership forged in music and fueled by a deep, palpable passion. Hank wrote some of his most poignant songs for her, and she in turn was his ultimate muse, the voice that could perfectly articulate the complex emotions he committed to paper. But the same passion that fueled their creativity also made their personal life a roller coaster. Both were strong-willed, outspoken, and accustomed to being the center of attention. The pressures of two major careers, the constant touring, and the intense, often chaotic lifestyle of the music business began to take their toll. Their marriage was a beautiful, creative, and often stormy affair. After several years, the partnership that had started with such a brilliant musical spark eventually ran its course, and they divorced. Jeannie, who had come to Nashville and built a life and career with Hank, was once again on her own. She continued her career, a beloved and constant presence at the Opry and on the road. She remarried, trying to build a new life and find a new sense of stability. By 1977, she was a seasoned veteran of the industry, a woman who had seen the dizzying heights of success and navigated the difficult terrain of personal heartbreak. She was a survivor, a woman who had proven her strength and resilience time and again. But the greatest test of that strength, a trial by fire that would push her to the absolute brink of existence, was still to come. On a June day in 1977, Jeannie Seely was a passenger in a car driving near her home in Nashville. In a terrifying, instantaneous flash of violence, another vehicle crossed the center line and collided with them head-on. The impact was catastrophic. The world exploded into a vortex of twisting metal and unimaginable force. When the chaos subsided, Jeannie was barely alive. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, her body broken. The litany of her injuries was horrifying. A collapsed lung, a shattered jaw that required extensive reconstruction, broken ribs, and a litany of other severe internal and external wounds. As she drifted in and out of consciousness in the intensive care unit, she was unaware of the full scope of the tragedy. Her second husband, who had been driving the other car, had been killed in the accident. She awoke to a world of unimaginable pain, both physical and emotional. Her body was a landscape of agony, but that was nothing compared to the crushing weight of the grief and trauma. She was facing a recovery that was not measured in days or weeks, but in months, possibly years. There were moments in that hospital bed when it seemed impossible that she would ever walk again, let alone stand on a stage and sing. The voice that had been her passport to the world was silenced. The jaw that produced it wired shut. The spirit that had been so famously bright and indomitable was now shrouded in a profound darkness. This was a crucible that would have utterly broken most people. The physical pain was relentless. The emotional trauma was staggering, and the future of the career she had worked her entire life to build was now a terrifying, unanswered question. It was in this moment, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, stripped of the glamour of the stage and the adoration of the crowd, that the true measure of Jeannie Seely's character was revealed. The road back was long, arduous, and fraught with setbacks. It was a journey undertaken one painful step at a time. The physical therapy was grueling. There were multiple surgeries to reconstruct her face and jaw. She had to learn to live with the chronic pain and the permanent physical scars of the accident. But even more challenging was the battle to heal the invisible wounds, the grief, the fear, the post-traumatic stress that lingered long after the bones had mended. What pulled her through this abyss was the same thing that had driven her from the beginning, a deep primal love for the music and an unyielding will to survive. Her Opry family rallied around her, their love and support a constant source of strength. Friends would visit, sharing stories and reminding her of the vibrant world that was waiting for her outside the hospital walls. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to put the pieces of her life back together. And then came the day that once seemed impossible, the day she decided she was ready to go back to work. Her first performance back on the Opry stage was one of the most emotional nights in the institution's storied history. As she was introduced, the entire audience and every performer standing in the wings rose to their feet. The standing ovation was thunderous, a wave of love and respect that washed over her before she had sung a single note. She walked slowly, carefully, to the center stage, to that sacred circle of wood that had been her anchor for so long. She was thinner, frailer, and the physical scars were visible, but the light in her eyes, that famous witty spark, was brighter than ever. She took her place at the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and with a voice still rich with soul, and now imbued with a profound new depth of experience, she sang. In that moment, she was no longer just Miss Country Soul or the girl in the miniskirt. She was a symbol of human resilience, a living testament to the power of the human spirit to endure the unthinkable. She had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and had come out the other side, not broken, but forged into something even stronger. The performance was a triumph, a declaration that she had not just survived, she had overcome. The accident irrevocably changed her. It gave her a new perspective on life, on fame, and on what was truly important. In the years that followed, she found a new, lasting love with her husband, Gene Ward, a partnership that brought her a deep sense of peace and stability after a life of so much turmoil. Her career continued, but her role began to shift. The frantic pace of chasing hit records and touring the country gave way to a deeper, more profound dedication to her first love, the Grand Ole Opry. It was no longer just a stage, it was her sanctuary. The institution she had once challenged with her modern sensibilities now became her greatest comfort, her most constant companion. Her presence there became even more vital, her role as a host and ambassador even more cherished. She had always been a trailblazer, but now she was something more. She was a survivor, a woman of immense substance and strength, whose life story was now as powerful as any song she had ever sung. She had come through the fire, and in doing so, had transformed from a star into a true legend. Becoming a legend is one thing, living as one is another. For Jeannie Seely, the triumphant return to the Opry stage was not an endpoint, but a new beginning. The experience had forged her, transforming her public image from trailblazer to survivor. In the decades that followed, she would embrace a new and perhaps even more significant role, channeling the strength she discovered within herself into a quiet, unwavering dedication that would see her evolve from a beloved star into the very heart and soul of the institution she called home, its matriarch. The fire of tragedy does one of two things. It either consumes or it forges. For Jeannie Seely, the horrific accident of 1977 and her arduous recovery became a forging. She emerged from that crucible not weakened, but with a new sense of purpose and a profound appreciation for the constants in her life. The chase for the next hit record, the grueling demands of constant touring, these things began to take a backseat to a deeper, more abiding commitment. Her gaze turned fully toward her first and truest love, the Grand Ole Opry. In the final act of her remarkable career, the one-time rebel would transform into the institution's most devoted pillar, its beloved matriarch. Her story from the 1980s onward is a masterclass in dedication. While many of her contemporaries retired or scaled back their schedules, Jeannie's presence at the Opry became more consistent, more vital. She became the living, breathing heart of the show. As of today, she's been a member for more than 55 years, and she holds the distinction of being the female artist with the most performances in the Opry's history, a staggering number that climbs into the thousands. For Jeannie, the Opry was never just a gig. It was a responsibility, a family, and a sacred trust. As the years went by, her role evolved. She was no longer just a performer. She became the Opry's unofficial historian, its host in residence, and its most cherished mentor. For generations of younger artists making their nervous Opry debuts, The calming presence and sharp-witted encouragement of Jeannie Seely in The Wings became a treasured rite of passage. Stars, like Carrie Underwood and Brad Paisley, speak of her with a reverence usually reserved for the founding fathers of the genre. She is the cool aunt of the Opry, a direct link to the golden era of Roy Acuff and Minnie Pearl, yet as modern and relevant as the latest chart topper. She is the keeper of the flame, the one who remembers the stories, who understands the traditions, because she was there when so many of them were being written. Her creative spark never dimmed. In 2017, she released the album Written in Song, a brilliant project that saw her reclaim the songs she had written over the decades that had become hits for other artists. It was a powerful statement, a reminder to the world that before she was Miss Country Soul, the performer, she was Jeannie Seely, the songwriter. The album was a critical success, a testament to her enduring talent and a beautiful grace note in a career filled with highlights. Looking back from the vantage point of today, the controversies that once swirled around Jeannie Seely seem almost quaint. The miniskirt that caused such a stir at the Ryman is now seen for what it was, the opening shot in a quiet, long overdue revolution. The debate over whether she was a trailblazer or troublemaker has been decisively settled by the passage of time. She won. And in winning, she helped the Grand Ole Opry win too. Her story offers a profound lesson in how venerable institutions can and must evolve. The Opry did not break when she challenged its unwritten rules. It bent. It adapted. It learned that it could embrace modernity without sacrificing its soul. Jeannie's gentle revolution was crucial for the Opry's long-term survival. Her modern sensibility helped keep the institution relevant, building a bridge that allowed new generations of fans and artists to cross into its world. Her method was as important as her message. In an era of loud confrontational protests, Jeannie's activism was carried out with a smile, a joke, and an unshakable belief in her own talent. She didn't burn bridges, she charmed her way across them, proving that wit could be a more effective weapon than rage. She changed the system not by attacking it from the outside, but by earning a place of influence within it and remaking it in her own image. A little more stylish, a little more soulful, and a whole lot smarter. The ripples from the stone Jeannie Seely, tossed into the Nashville pond, have grown into waves that have shaped the very coastline of modern country music. Her legacy is not a static thing of the past. It is a living, breathing influence seen in the careers of countless women who have followed. Every time a female artist takes the stage in an outfit that expresses her own personal style rather than a conservative ideal, she is walking on a path Jeannie helped clear. Every time a woman hosts an award show or a television special with confidence and comedic flair, she is channeling the spirit of the woman who first proved it could be done on the Opry stage. And every time a songwriter, male or female, writes a country song that delves into the complex, messy, adult realities of love and heartbreak, they are building on the foundation of emotional honesty that Jeannie established with "Don't Touch Me." She helped dismantle the false choice that had long been presented to women in country music. You could be either a keeper of tradition or a modern rebel. Jeannie Seely proved you could be both. And in a beautiful final irony, the woman who was once seen as a threat to the Opry's traditions has become its most staunch and eloquent defender. The traditions she defends, however, are now more inclusive, more vibrant, and more resilient, precisely because she was brave enough to challenge them all those years ago. She didn't tear down the old walls. She just opened the windows and let the fresh air in. Jeannie Seely's final years were marked by a series of health challenges, a quiet yet resilient battle she faced with all of her characteristic strength. In 2024, during a trip back to her home state of Pennsylvania, a place that held her childhood memories, Jeannie Seely's health unexpectedly took a turn for the worse. She was urgently hospitalized in Pittsburgh in a concerning state. Doctors diagnosed her with acute diverticulitis, a painful inflammation of the intestines, compounded by severe dehydration. The news sparked widespread concern among her community of fans for the legend's well-being. However, with remarkable fortitude, Seely overcame the critical phase. Shortly after, she was discharged, and her representatives joyfully announced that she was recovering well, bringing a wave of hope and relief to all who admired her. The early months of 2025, however, brought a more arduous series of medical trials. The earlier optimism began to fade when, in May 2025, Seely herself shared with the public that she had undergone not just one, but multiple surgeries since March. Her fight did not end there. The complex treatment led to a complication of pneumonia, a dangerous illness, especially for the elderly, which further seriousened her condition. Yet with the spirit of a fighter, she continued to push through rehabilitation, valiantly fighting to regain her health. Despite the best efforts of her medical team and her own unwavering will, her battle came to an end. Jeannie Seely passed away on August 1st, 2025 at the age of 85. The final cause of death was determined to be an intestinal infection, a cruel complication related to the health issues she had previously faced. At the time of her passing, she was under care at the TriStar Summit Medical Center in Hermitage, Tennessee, very near Nashville, the heart of the country music world to which she had dedicated her entire life. Her departure leaves an irreplaceable void in the hearts of her fans and in the history of the Grand Ole Opry. In the end, the story of Jeannie Seely is a quiet masterpiece of resilience, talent, and above all, authenticity. Her journey from the banking desk in Pennsylvania to the heart of the Nashville establishment is a testament to the power of a dream pursued with unwavering dedication. Her survival through personal tragedy is a lesson in the formidable strength of the human spirit, but her greatest legacy is her unwavering sense of self. She never set out to be a revolutionary. She simply set out day after day, year after year, to be Jeannie Seely. And in a time and place that often demanded conformity from its women, that simple act of being herself was the most revolutionary thing she could have done. She is a living, breathing country song, one filled with heartache, humor, and a whole lot of soul. The girl who once shocked the Opry with a miniskirt now stands as its matriarch, a timeless and treasured icon who is still on stage, still telling her stories, and still, after all these years, getting the last laugh.